Welcome to this week's Tech Insights webinar series. This week we are talking about getting out of the data center business. My name is Nathan Lesnosky. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. We're going to have a lot of interesting conversations today, and our guest is a newcomer to our webinar series. This is Mark Slavin. Mark is a managing architect with Concurrency. He has been involved in some very large cloud migrations and modernization of data center environments. And I'm very thankful to welcome him to the webinar today. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Nate. Happy to be here.
All right. So today we are going to be talking about getting out of the data center business. We are going to cover why do it? What's the point? Why am I even thinking about this? We're going to be talking about building a plan and a team. What is the organizational change that's necessary? And then we're going to talk about how you execute and how you make it a real activity that's making progress and something's getting done around. We also would like to welcome you to attend our upcoming webinars. We have great conversations that are coming up that are tied to many of the North Stars that we believe that businesses should be executing within 2021. The first of these is tied to intellectual property solutions, especially around accelerating manufacturing and artificial intelligence. I think you'll find that to be a really interesting conversation. It's really in the disruptive side of the business, talking about how you drive new revenue or operational savings. So don't miss that if you're anywhere involved in a supply chain or in a customer engagement. Next, in the same kind of vein, we want to talk about creating digital lines of business. That is on February 25th. Another great conversation. We're going to focus on how companies are creating new revenue streams, especially now within the digital business and how we've transformed our economy. This is a great time to be talking about this topic. So don't miss that on February 25th. All right, so let's dive into our topic for today on getting out of the data center business. So data centers, let's say, why are we trying to get out of them in the first place? What's the point? Well, first thing we're seeing is this is one of the mega themes that's happening within 2021. The 5 things we're seeing companies doing in 2021 are they're creating digital lines of business. They're trying to drive new revenue and operational savings through AI. They are making progress on zero trust. Security is on everyone's mind. This is maybe even the most obvious of North Stars this year. And then they're trying to measure and increase digital productivity. And all around this lives how we leverage our cloud data center to make these things happen, especially these things at the top. As we're creating new digital lines of business, as we're driving new revenue and operational savings with AI, the modern data center is core to accomplishing that. So that's one sort of aspect of its relationship to other North Stars. The other reasons as to why you want to get out of the data center business, if this were to be, what are Nate's reasons why you'd go about doing this? Here's my hard-hitting reasons. One, it is the single best thing that you can do in addition to identity to mitigating ransomware and targeted attacks. And the reason why is we'll talk about later in this webinar is because you're implementing micro network segmentation in your data center as you do it. And that is one of the #1 things you can do to mitigate lateral movement within your ecosystem. It doesn't happen in the on-premise environment. It's something you should do, and it's critical to achieving that mitigation against those targeted attacks and ransomware, which we as a company are seeing from companies on an ongoing basis. The next is that modern applications just straight up aren't built in legacy data centers. You're not seeing people deploying container infrastructures in their legacy data centers. You're seeing people talk about it, seeing people talk about the edge and what's happening with the edge. And yeah, there's going to be some sectors in that space, but modern applications just aren't being built. They're not being built on Windows domain joined virtual machines. They're built on containers. They're built on serverless. They're built on modern architectures. And your cloud needs to be in a position to be able to execute on that. The next is that application and policies are built to control and mitigate risks. The idea that I can take the policy of an organization, apply that to the way that I then implement that within the cloud is so much more rich and mature than what I could ever do in the on-premise environment. Fourth, the cost to run, the maturity of a similar data center. One of the things I hear all the time from customers is, it's just too expensive. I can run it cheaper on-premise. It's kind of like comparing the doghouse outside of your house to the actual house. The level of capability that exists in that doghouse, yeah, sure, I could probably live for a night overnight in that doghouse, and I can make it kind of nice for me to sit there and it'd be okay. But in comparison to the level of control and comfort and process and organization to my actual house, it doesn't really hold water. And what we're seeing is that companies have gotten so comfortable running at a low level of maturity that it takes something like getting hit by ransomware for them to realize how low of maturity they've been operating. So what we see is that even at just very modest levels of maturity, the cloud data center has a better cost basis, and at high levels of maturity, there isn't even a comparison. We'll talk about that today. Also, flexibility to execute for the business. Clearly, there's an ability for us to scale up and scale down, to drive new testing workloads, shut them off, etc., in allowing the business to be able to scale. How much more can we see that from businesses' needs today? And finally, it reduces skill dependencies on legacy skills and enables us to build something very quickly from a variety of skills that become primary, secondary, tertiary. It is really changing the way that we can engage in our environments, especially when you have skill dependencies on premise. Only this one guy knows this thing on the SAN. This is an opportunity for us to move to an environment where the skills are becoming commodities, now advanced commodities at that, but they're skills that can be much more easily ramped up on by a wide community of diverse individuals that can do this kind of work. So what we're seeing is that companies are climbing this maturity curve. They're moving from not enabling in their on-premise environment to seeing the business say, you know what, IT is not enabling. I'm going to start to leverage the cloud. I'm going to start to just start putting stuff out there and see what happens. And that drives the businesses to need this operationalized cloud in place. And the IT organizations then getting that in place to allow for this innovation to happen above on top of the operationalized cloud. And you'll see that represented with some of the conversations Mark and I have. So let's get into it. So Mark, we talked a little bit about the why. We talked about the maturity curve that companies are growing. They're going from doing nothing to emerging to hitting organizational change. Tell me about, as they get to that point, backing up just a second, as they get to that point of the operationalized cloud and they're building that competency to be able to engage in supporting the business as they build a streamlined cloud product development organization, as they become an innovation differentiator, and then as they fully integrate technology into the entire business. What is the critical organizational change that's happening as businesses evolve their support of that organization into the cloud?
Well, Nate, there's a couple of things there. Of course, in your traditional kind of an IT organization, it's very siloed by technology stacks, and there's almost these kind of barriers that are in some cases intentionally put into place because each one of those areas generally are rewarded by keeping changes from happening in it, right? Which doesn't really bode well for allowing flexibility and innovation with the business. So they're focused on kind of keeping change from happening. Now, modern technology, it is dramatically different because you have the ability to quickly provide solutions in a very robust and secure framework that allows you to provide capabilities for the business to create disruptions or realize opportunity for cost reductions. The skills are again a little different. If you think about this, in the cloud, you have a lot of prefabricated solutions that you can apply to business problems, whereas in the traditional IT organization, you have to purchase and build those capabilities up from the ground. And so that takes time, that takes a lot of more depth of skill. So in the modern technology, we're able to kind of get at providing those capabilities without having to build it. It's almost like prefabricated houses, if you will. The other aspect is, in the modern technology, it lends itself to using code, infrastructure as code, matching up with your application code. But this really gives a great opportunity to provide repeatable solutions, reliable and having consistent delivery for solutions using automation and infrastructure as code. So that's a big change that I see in the organizations, is being able to adapt to that and to latch onto that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And another thing I'm seeing here that maybe you can dive into a little bit is just the number of boxes. Like, it feels like that that traditional IT organization has a tendency to heavily isolate functions from each other, then requiring redundancy in those functions, or maybe a lack of redundancy that exists in those functions. And then the move to maybe a little bit more primary, secondary, tertiary within the context of a cloud with less dependency. Like, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, all of these solutions in the cloud, have aspects, right? So you've got compute aspects, you've got storage aspects, you've got network aspects, and in the cloud, as you have architects and DevOps teams, they become familiar with working with those solutions across, again, the higher level aspects of those technologies. Whereas in the data center, those teams typically, have a deeper skill set. They have the levels of control and the necessary levels of configuration are much deeper and integrated into other systems. So you've got all of these skeletons in the closet that you have to concern yourself. So, so that level of extraction from those details allows your teams to become, have that familiarity across the ability to use those technologies instead of building it. That's the difference, right? So that ability to use the technology is kind of encapsulated in the people who build the technology on premises, but in the modern technology, everybody's a consumer of those types of things. And so you don't have to worry about how the clock is built, just how to use it to tell the time.
Yeah, great point. It feels like so many of these boxes over here exist to build the framework of the system that then the users use. Whereas we're kind of bringing that together into one governance team that enables the rest of the business, the rest of the business being these application product teams, which they may exist within IT, or they might exist within the business itself and is using the cloud that's been prepared for it. But there's not as much to, it's not like every time they want to use it, you need this whole variety of internal teams to be able to prepare it. It's like there for them to start executing on. And you combine that with the innovation and business enablement teams and security teams, and you have a much more rapid, agile organization.
I kind of liken it to my kids building things with Legos. The cloud has all these Lego pieces, and you as an architect or operator, or even if you have an architecture team that has defined service usage and put the parameters around it, the guidelines there, your business can come in and take from here, pick this, I pick this, I pick this, I put it together, and I have a solution.
A lot more fun to play with Legos than it is to build the Legos themselves.
That's right.
Talk real quickly about what Horizon 3 looks like, right? From those not familiar with Horizon, Miles, Horizon 3 is like, this is our end game. This is where the modernization that is possible with the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, with everything getting to code, right? I mean, so we have our application teams that have been very comfortable and familiar for years managing their application code and using that and deploying it, and hopefully in a matured process, they even have inputs of that from monitoring and other feedback mechanisms back into it to complete that life cycle. Application or infrastructure, this is kind of new to a lot of people, and looking at that same concept of infrastructure having a life cycle and infrastructure being into code. But once you get to that point of being able to map and marry that together, the solutions, the infrastructure and application, the evolutionary process to get to that leaves you in a situation where you can so rapidly deploy, so rapidly change, that it really does give the business an ability to affect change, create those market disruptions, find opportunities to make improvements, and have all of that stuff packaged together.
Absolutely, it really represents how the cloud supports a agile development lifecycle from start to finish, ideation through work intake, through to delivery and operation, without ever deploying a virtual machine, right? With a full contiguous cycle. Talk a little bit about how that contrasts with what we would call Horizon 2, which is, when people think about lifting their data center to the cloud, they think about like, well, what am I really getting from that? I'm just moving my legacy data center. You're actually gaining quite a bit. Talk a little bit about what that Horizon 2 architecture looks like in contrast to that on-premise data center.
Yeah, the difference, and thanks for bringing that up, because that Horizon 3 is really more about that serverless level of abstraction there, because you just really just need that compute capability, right, for your application, and you don't have to own or run that, just consume it. But when we migrate legacy applications over there, the big win that we're getting here is setting the stage for that in this phase. So looking at codifying the infrastructure, whether that's the network, the servers, the storage, those things, getting that kind of concept and mindset of putting your infrastructure and managing it through a DevOps workflow process, while you might still today be delivering that compute through a virtual machine, right? It just still makes it very easy to make the move then as you re-architect and re-platform your application, refactor it into a serverless type of solution. All of your building blocks, your places are already in place.
Huge point, Mark. I want to hit hard something that is it's sort of a historical problem. For well over 10 years, I'm sure many people have heard this topic longer than this. I've heard people talk about people building CMDBs that have a business service listed, and then all the components are understood, and I can go to the CMDB and I can see a configuration management database, and I can see the relationship between that service and all the things that are tied to it, and because of that I can support it. Well, you know what? That never happened. The quantity of companies that built that and did it successfully, and it's really actually provided value, is incredibly low, especially in that highly capable, relationship-oriented CMDB kind of ecosystem. This skips over that step, and it makes the infrastructure that's deployed along with your legacy application infrastructure as code. It's idempotent in a sense that you design what the infrastructure code looks like, and what it is what it says it is. And that realization of code to deployment to validation is where a whole step of maturity happens over the sort of manual sense of understanding what makes up our applications. And it's a huge value over what we had done historically in our data centers. All right, so let's hop to a different topic here, Mark. Doghouse to the main house, doghouse to penthouse, maybe. What are we learning from doing the cost analysis? This is such a, lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? You're in a space of just all sorts of mishmash. How do we break through this? How do we get honesty into how we compare apples to apples here?
So that's a really good question. I think you alluded to it earlier on. There's a lot of misunderstandings around total cost of delivering services on premises. And as we work with customers that feel that they know what that is, when we start diving into the details using, cost models and asking the detailed questions to be able to our code or to quantify what that really is, those numbers sometimes are quite surprising to them. And then when we compare that to hosting those same systems as they are in the cloud, we very continuously find that by just leveraging the compute costs and the storage there in the cloud, the savings do exist. It can be quite extensive, actually, because there's a couple of other stories that kind of go underneath this slide that you've got here. What we find is there's often a case of on-premises of systems being underutilized or over-allocated resources, right? So there's some impact to that too, because in a data center, when you're managing those kind of resources, you've got finite resources in your data center, and what happens historically is because in the legacy data center, it's too difficult to expand those resources, so teams just pre-allocate all that stuff even though they might not need it. And so those become these hidden costs factors too. When we get to the cloud and we start looking at, hey, if we just really provide to you what you need, the run cost is significantly less. And that's a big surprising story, especially when you start adding on incentives like in Azure that Microsoft provides, whether it's using hybrid benefits or reservations. Those costs, those run costs, really do dramatically decrease. But there's some other aspects too that might not be necessarily on here, but I think is an important story when we talk with customers. Is the resources that you have in your data center are provided through a capital expenditure, which has to be planned for. It creates cash flow disruption, and then it's finite there. And so if you have something big that you need to do, you're looking at laying out a significant amount of cost. But you even alluded to it earlier, where in the cloud, if you have something that you want to do, you can spin it up, you can run it, and if you decide that that's something that you don't want to do anymore, you can just bring it down, and you haven't lost any capital expenditure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that flexibility. And where you believe you're going to run a workload over a period of time, there's that reserve model. You can see a very drastic difference between no reserve and the 3-year reserve model in some of these use cases in comparisons to even the on-premise costs. And what we're seeing is people they're making these comparisons, A, without understanding their on-premise environment well enough, B, without understanding capabilities, and C, without really even understanding the ways they reduce it in the cloud, right sizing, Azure hybrid use benefits, reserves, versus they went out to the Azure calculator and punched in some server numbers. So there's a real truth to this, and it's important that we hit it. All right, so Mark, another huge topic, security, especially security changes that companies are making. I think there's 2 primary ones we want to hit on today, but they're both really important, especially as people are getting out of the data center business, they're getting into a new kind of business. And one of these is a big change to how they operate their legacy data centers that brings a new layer of security, probably in my opinion, the most important reason why people move to the cloud. And the second is about how they protect their environment. So kind of talk through these 2 major changes.
Sure. With every customer that I've helped in their cloud journey, when we start looking at deploying network infrastructure into the cloud and we discuss microsegmentation, the security guys and the network guys are going, yes, finally, right? Because that's something that they have a difficult time delivering on premises. But that's a really important critical security feature, because I think you talked about it a little bit with ransomware that we see happening in the world today. If a system were to get compromised, that lateral movement, right, can be dramatically mitigated by use of capabilities like microsegmentation, and you almost create this mini DMZ for each application in itself, right? So isolated altogether. And there are key components, constructs, in the Azure cloud that make this very easy to implement, right? Through subnetting, through network security groupings. It just is too easy to not do and to protect yourself.
Yeah, when I've seen companies go and do migrations and not do this, I've been like, oh, you missed it. Like, this was the chance. You had the chance, you missed the chance. What was wrong with you? Like, this is like the golden opportunity, because you have to understand the application to move it. And you have a point in time where you're changing the app. It's like the perfect time to do this.
I mean, I've been, like I said, every one of my customers that we've moved over here has adopted microsegmentation. It's just a foregone conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about protecting the data center itself? Like, we don't have access to the door. I can't like walk into the Azure data center and say, hi, I'd like to go find my servers today. Like, how do I protect this thing?
Well, so the key now is really around identity, right? So that is the means with which you gain access to everything, and how you leverage Azure AD for that with multi-factor authentication, right, and conditional types of access. So so that really is the starting point, because everything in the cloud, can be role-based, conditional, and you've got with the workstations now, with zero trust strategy and workstations, you really aren't keeping any data in those assets. It's really just using that remote workstation as a tool. I come with my identity and I know who I am, and I can show to you that I am who I am. And then I get to those assets where all that data is, and I can work there. And then if anything happens here, nobody can represent me, so they can't get to that data. And then in my zero trust workstation, I'm not on a network where I can be compromised, and I'm not using assets that are going to be storing data there, right? So it really changes the landscape.
Yeah, it comes down to that understanding that identity is the control plane, and it is all that separates you from being compromised within the cloud data center. And in a sense, that's good and bad, right? It's good that if we build an appropriate conditional access control around our Azure AD, we have well more protection than we ever had in our on-premise data centers. But in conjunction with that, we also have to take that maturity very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it requires a lot of thought and planning.
Absolutely. So, Mark, let's jump quickly. We have about 3 minutes here, so I want to hit two topics very briefly.
Okay.
Talk really quickly about what's this. We talked about the org evolution. What does that mean in regards to the types of architectures we're using and considering?
Sure. Well, on premises, you're generally dealing with more of that monolithic, architecture, and it relates back to the old days of hands-on things. But as we see, applications taking more of a, microservices, serverless, or even that next layer of extrapolation from there to containers, the skills necessary to do that, change, right? So operation teams and architects really need to understand those microservices and kind of container aspects of in what you need to do to design infrastructure to support those solutions, and to how to monitor and manage those types of solutions. So that's really a key evolution for those operations and support folks to begin to adopt.
Makes sense. And that really aligns that Horizon 3 direction where we're building the cloud not just to support our improvement to the way we operate our current data centers, but to prepare ourselves to operate modern workloads.
Yes.
All right. So last part of this here, I want to hit the project plan. What are the main work streams that you're seeing companies execute on to be successful at building out their cloud architecture?
Right. So, one of the first things is really to do that initial assessment where we can kind of define the costs, the high-level costs associated with, what you're hosting your applications into the cloud. But even more so, that leads us to then creating that landing zone, that place, that governance structure around a location to go to in the cloud. You need to do that. That's just critical. And then we can start working on developing the DevOps work streams, getting that infrastructure as code layer put into place. Start to rationalize those applications to see which ones we're going to, move as a lift and shift, kind of an IaaS thing, which one we might refactor into, PaaS solutions, which ones we might not do anything to, certainly, and which ones are no longer needed, right? So that's kind of the flow of that. But more importantly, all along that, that cost analysis, we can do those assessments up front, but once we get things in there, we start to work with the solutions. That's where we can really keep on those things to make sure that we're only using what we need and only paying for what we need.
Yeah, that's a key point. And the move to the cloud is sometimes like cleaning out the old basement. Like if I move from one house to another house, I have that opportunity where I have a dumpster. And I love getting the dumpster because I can chuck all the old stuff in the dumpster and get rid of it. That's what this project is like. It's like getting the dumpster in your data center and backing in the stuff you don't need anymore. And then migrating only the stuff you want to keep, right? And then having a really strong cost analysis process around the new estate.
Yeah. I can't tell you the number of times I've worked with customers that said like, yeah, so we've got these things, we don't even have any idea if anybody's using them, what it's used for or anything. And we shut it down and nobody knew the difference.
Yeah, totally. All right, thanks, Mark. All right, so next steps. We want to meet one-on-one with you about this topic, about where you are on your cloud journey. Your cloud journey is somewhere on the maturity curve. You're getting started, you're partway through, you are at a point of building out your Azure foundation and operational governance, or you're above it. We would love to meet with you one-on-one, provide education to your team. That's a huge priority to us, is to provide education and to drive out how you can accelerate your 2021 getting out of the data center business project. So when you close down this webinar, make sure you select one of the next steps. We would love to meet with you. No strings attached. We just want to have a conversation. Don't forget about our upcoming webinars, IP Solutions, Getting and Creating Digital Lines of Business, and then check out all the previous videos that we've done on these topics and on our website for blogs and videos and other assets. Thank you so much to Mark for participating in the webinar today. You're a huge asset. Thank you for all the detail you provided. And also, we will see you in these upcoming webinars. Have a great day.
Thanks, Nate.